This is one of a series of videos looking at historical evidence for rights-of-way cases. Here, we're talking about old maps that predate the Ordnance Survey. We often think of maps as being a relatively recent phenomenon, but actually no, they're almost as old as people are. They probably just didn't survive as well, and certainly weren't as widely known to as many people. So there are traces of Paleolithic maps, and you can imagine the earliest people sketching in the sand with a stick where they'd found the fish or where the berries were. Ancient Greeks and Egyptians and Indian communities or cultures were brilliant map makers, considering what materials they had, what tools they had. Their accuracy is really quite phenomenal. The Mercator map of 1568 is often what's referred to as the first map, but actually, as you can see, the Mappa Mundi of 8th century way predated it. Whatever the history of map making, they were pretty rare to the normal public before 1800, and even then, because they were so expensive, it was very likely that many people went through their whole life without ever seeing a map. The cost and the interpretation of them. So if we're looking at pre-Ordnance Survey maps, what do we need to consider? They have some very important elements that apply to all of the maps. The first one is the title block. Study the title block. What was the purpose for which the map was made? Who was the surveyor? What was the date of the survey? And does it differ from the date of the publication by a great deal? Sometimes surveys were republished under other names without being rectified or updated for accuracy. So the date of survey, the date of publication, mention of any accuracies or resurveys can be important in establishing the value of that particular map. The key, the legend, the bit that shows what the lines mean or what was intended by any notation on the map is vital. The scale often wasn't mentioned, but if it is mentioned, then that's important. If you're photographing a map for evidence, make sure that you photograph all of those elements of the map. And ideally, photograph the whole map, not just the little bit that you're using for this particular route. Because very often we find that once having investigated one route, we find evidence that points to numerous others in the area. And it would be well worthwhile already having any piece of evidence that you have looked at to be able to look at any other route on the same records without having to go back to your source and photograph a bit more. So always photograph the whole map if at all possible. Here's an example of a title block, and you can see it's of Yorkshire. It's to the nobility, gentry and clergy. In other words, the people with money, the people who were travelling by means that might need a map, rather than simply by word of mouth or sense of direction or following others. It's from a survey commenced in the year 1817 and corrected in 1827 and 1828, so kept up to date, dedicated to the proprietors, the people who commissioned it. So there was an element of needing to be able to sell it and sell it to people who were using it. Two examples of map keys and why they're so important. Always check them first so that you know what you're looking at when you see the map and your route. Typical examples: mail roads, turnpike roads, carriage roads, parochial roads. And often we think, what exactly did they mean? Turnpike roads are well documented. They were the toll roads of the period. Carriage roads, which are parochial roads, and then parochial roads. So was a parochial road also a carriage road? Which excludes the other? Not quite sure. In the second one, you've got railroads, turnpike roads, crossroads. Crossroads does not mean a junction as it would today. A crossroad was a more minor road going in between other roads. Something that was not a toll road, not a turnpike road, but mostly not a major route. Road today in rights-of-way cases will immediately be contested as you don't know whether it's private or public. Well, no. However, road to anybody apart from people dealing with rights of way opposition has always meant a public highway. And it is well documented throughout case law, throughout art, throughout history of society and culture. Ask anybody down the pub, in the supermarket, what's a road? And they'll say, something that the public can go along, kind of thing. They will not think of a private road, which is why the Shell Guide's legend, key, is so vital to us. Because yes, principal through routes, good motoring roads, serving loads of different roads. Private roads were distinguished as private roads. In other words, you couldn't go along them. Just road meant road for everybody, until we start getting nitpicky about opposition to rights of way. We also have to establish the fact that in the history, despite our amazing predecessors who were wondrous mappers, there is variation in the accuracy. And there have been long argued cases where the opposition was stating, well, it couldn't possibly be the same route because you've only overlaid it with the Ordnance Survey map. It wasn't on the same alignment. Well, no, but it was still a route from A to B, which was so well used that it was actually documented on a map of the period. And we also find, depending on the scale of the plan, that it's really common. And here are quotations from documentation of the time, from diaries, from novels, from various books, nearly straight on the map, but took us round a great many miles. Inevitable inaccuracies in old maps. Yes, of course there were. Here we can compare and contrast. So there we have a route coloured ochre from Oswald Kirk down to the southwest. Look at the shape of it. If we compare that with another map 40 years later, yes, you can still distinguish the route from Oswald Kirk down to the southwest. It hadn't changed. There were no diversions. It was the same. However, there are distinct differences in the alignment of it. But that's the difference in the survey. It's different in the detail. It's still there. And if we compare it with a much more recent road atlas, you can see, yeah, it hasn't changed. However, there are some similarities greater in the earliest map and some similarities greater in the second map. So expecting exactly the same route throughout the years is just unreasonable based on the differences in surveying skills and techniques. So if we look at the shape of this route outlined in red on the map in front of us, think of the shape of that. If we compare it with an older map, yes, it's there, it's undeniably the same route, but of course the alignment differs a little, but it is still the same route from A to B with the upside down V following the base of the escarpment. And we could see the same route on here. Even though it's tiny scale, the shape is very similar, the characteristics of the shape. And here, even though it seems flatter, well, there is a difference in the way that they surveyed it. Here we've got a very twisty dog-leggy route down to the southwest, which differs also from the way that it's shown on the previous map. But actually it's not really changed at that time. You can see today, though, it's significantly changed, because there it's a much straighter line. More on that later. Thank you for listening. There are other videos in this series.